Welcome to Inside Out, the Louver-clad podcast where we explore how Australia's most distinctive facades are inspired, engineered and implemented. If you've ever wondered how ambitious designs make the leap from concept to construction, you're in the right place. In every episode, we'll take you behind the scenes of complex projects, delve into challenges, and meet the designers, makers and visionaries who turn bold ideas into iconic facades. So today we've got Jess Caire. Jess Caire is the Executive Director of the Property Council of Australia, Queensland, and a Director of the Games Independent Infrastructure and Coordination Authority. But at heart, she's a property person through and through. From starting out in conveyancing and running her own businesses to leading digital reform at PEXA and now Queensland's peak property body, Jess has built a career on curiosity, courage, and genuine passion for the sector. Known for a collaborative and authentic leadership style, she is focused on lifting productivity, unlocking housing supply, and ensuring Brisbane 2032 delivers a lasting legacy for Queensland. Welcome, Jess. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. You're now the Executive Director of the Property Council of Australia, Queensland Division. Also, Director of the Games Independent Infrastructure and Coordination Authority. Yeah, obviously you've had a passion for property for a very long time. You've built this career from conveyancing and business ownership through to leading Queensland's peak property body. So what first drew you into the property industry?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Ozava, and I always get uncomfortable when people read out my bio. But yeah, look, property is the only industry I've ever worked in. I'm originally from South Australia where conveyancers play a critical role. So if you're transacting property or developing property, you're less inclined to go to a lawyer, you use a conveyancer. So I was probably attracted to it for a couple of reasons. My dad was always buying and selling property and doing up houses and flipping houses. And he grew up in social housing. And I look back now as an adult and realized that was probably really trying to make that sort of security for him and his family. But it also sort of ingrained this really hard work, work ethic within all of us. But what I love about property is it's really tangible, and I think it probably aligned to my personality. So you're super organized. And what I love about conveyancing is whether you're dealing with a mum and dad who are buying their first home, or anyone buying their first home, through to dealing with property developers, there's this great journey that you go on. And property is such an emotional thing, as people are buying houses, where they're going to raise their families.
Absolutely.
And we see that play out in the current dialogue around the great Australian dream. And I just sort of always loved the fact that being involved in it. So way back, I'm going to say 16 years ago, actually longer than that, probably 20 years ago, it means I'm getting old. I was really naive and bought some businesses and was really good at conveyancing and thought I would like to be a business owner as well. And that's kind of where my journey started. And then I came to Queensland 10 years ago and still had my businesses and really wanted to adopt a technology kind of component. And the firms that I managed and owned and operated, we did everything from major rural transactions through to property development in the CBD and through to, your mum and dad, what we would call standard conveyancing transactions. So it was a really good depth and breadth of experience. And I guess, learned from that how to build great relationships, which ultimately got me my job here when I moved to Queensland.
Wow. I don't think you seem old enough to have done all that.
Definitely am and definitely feel it.
That's a lot. You've worked across private businesses, digital reform at PEXA, and now high-level advocacy. So what experiences really shaped your leadership style?
I was really young when I bought my first business, and I think a little bit of naivety and a lack of fear is, I look at it now and go, God, if I knew then, if I knew now what I know, that I absolutely wouldn't have bought these businesses. One of the things I learned pretty quickly is you can be really good at your art. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a great business owner, and it doesn't mean you're going to be a great leader. So I did everything wrong. Like I hired family members. I tried to do it all and not ask for help. And, it was sort of a crash course in what not to do. And despite all of that, my businesses were successful. But as an individual, I really had to go on a bit of a journey and really tap into that sort of self-awareness piece and start thinking about the team teams that I needed to sort of surround myself with. Where am I weak? Where am I strong? And make sure I'd build teams around me that sort of complemented that. And in 2016, I had a near death experience while I was trekking Kokoda and fell down a cliff 25 meters. And, that was my moment of kind of like, what am I doing here with my life? I've moved to Queensland. I'm running these businesses and I didn't feel particularly fulfilled or happy. And so that was a personal story, but also one that's probably reflected on where I am in my career around doing the things that are purposeful and doing the things that really have meaning. And I think that's where, I love my job at Property Council. It's such a privilege and an honour to be the voice of the industry, but also the industry that contributes not only to the economy, but to society as well. And it's a responsibility and a privilege I don't take lightly. I have the great privilege of learning from some of the best industry leaders. And I think from a leadership point of view, I look at what other people do and go, oh, I really like that, and take a little bit from everybody. And I think just keep an open mind. Like, I'm not the same as I was a year ago. I'm definitely not the same as I was 10 years ago. And to make sure I'm always open to that journey. And I get it wrong. I frequently get it wrong. I think it's about admitting when you get it wrong and making sure that you surround yourself with people who are going to be happy enough to tell you when you got it wrong, and then are there to champion you on the side to make sure that you can continue to grow.
Yeah, as they say, fail fast to succeed.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And having that team around you. Yeah, well, that's amazing. I think I was going to ask you, what drives you personally, but that is answering all my questions in that respect.
Well, about driving personally, I reflect on this a lot. I work a lot. I'm a hard worker. I'm certainly not the smartest person in the room. I'm definitely not the most educated person in the room. But I talked about my dad and that work ethic. That's kind of been drilled into all of us. It's not always a good thing though, because working 100-hour weeks is not a badge of honour we should be proud of. And I think that's been something I've had to really reflect on over the last 5 or 6 years. I'm the kind of person, see it, do it. And that sometimes can disempower your team. Sometimes you need to step back and allow other people to step in, even though you could get it done. So I still grapple with that a lot. And I think one of the things I know I'm really good at is working. So when I'm feeling like I'm not good at anything else, I work. So that's not a good thing. And I think what drives me is that constant drive to want to be better. The downside to that is not particularly feeling comfortable in just sitting in the quiet, which is something I need to get better at.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
I think I get a lot of my drive from my father as well. He was a really hard worker. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a whole lot of therapy for that.
But yeah, absolutely. Slowly getting there. Now that you're in this executive director role for the Property Council, what kind of impact do you hope to leave on Queensland?
Yeah, I mean, the property industry plays such a critical role, not just in our economy. 1 in 4 Australians derive their income and their career from property, either directly or indirectly, but also think about the critical role that cities, communities, housing plays in our society. When I think about the role that we play, and I have, it's an incredible privilege to be the voice of industry. It's to make sure that I am the voice for the members who are the city shapers, the community builders, and to ensure that the policy settings deliver generational benefit. And property developers and the property industry, their legacy is what they leave behind, which is the buildings that they deliver. It's the communities that they shape, whether that's a greenfield master plan or an amazing precinct in the city. So it's ensuring that we're championing that and making sure that the settings are right for that. I really am just a custodian of that message. So I feel great privilege to be able to drive that. When I think about where Brisbane's at the moment, and even just the last decade that I've lived here, how much it's changed. What I really hope to see is that we keep what's iconically and uniquely Queensland as we continue to grow as a city and take our rightful spot in, being a gateway city and being a global destination.
It's just about to change even more, isn't it, with the whole rush to 2032?
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot to deliver.
Yeah, Brisbane 2032. Everyone's thinking this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, obviously. From your perspective, what does, getting it right actually look like for Queensland's built environment?
Everyone does think 2032 is a generational opportunity, and I totally agree with it. It's more than the 4 weeks of the games, and there'll be a lead up to, and there'll be the post games. What's getting it right is that my children and your children look back at all of us and say, geez, they got it right, and that their children get to have the enduring benefit of the legacy and that generational infrastructure that creates spaces and places that people want to be in.
Yeah, so it's really thinking like beyond the games, isn't it? And thinking about building buildings that are going to last lifetimes.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's, I have this incredible privilege of being on the Geeka board with 6 other incredible humans who are so deeply passionate about driving a really great outcome for Queensland, is that the young people are putting their future in our hands. And I think as decision makers and policy shapers, that's not lost on me. And I think as we think about the 10, 20 or 30 years time, we need to be thinking about what they need and what they want. And sometimes I think their voices are not necessarily heard, and we need to amplify that more and more. And, there's a lot of great work happening in that space, but they're ultimately going to be the ones that are the beneficiaries of the decisions that we make now.
When we talk about, we're hearing a lot about these construction sector reforms. What are the most important changes in the industry? Can you explain this, like how this is really going to make a difference to how we get things done, I suppose, and move things forward in the building industry?
Yeah, definitely. It's been a well-publicised productivity challenge over many years, and it really sort of started brewing, sort of post-COVID in particular. That's when it sort of started to amplify. But I think it had been, there was a groundswell kind of happening before that. There's a sort of a multitude of things like productivity. Manual labour has only increased, I think it's 5% over that sort of 30 year. We're only 5% more productive than we were 30 years ago. But also, a lot of our members were getting 2.75 days a week on site, which is just mind blowing. You can't deliver projects like that. You certainly can't deliver projects on time and on budget if you're only getting 2.75 days productivity. But also there's that sort of cultural piece as well around some of the behaviours that were happening. So 2024, at the back end of when the government changed, the Queensland Productivity Commission was reinstated, which is something the Property Council really pushed for. And their first piece of work was to do an investigation into the building and construction sector. So they did a draft report, which was excellent. We fed a lot of the data and information into that. And then their final report landed at the back end of last year, and the government responded early this year, and they adopted about 80% of those recommendations, ranging from government procurement all the way through to the impact of taxes on delivering projects. So that's been excellent, and we will work really closely with the government on implementing that to make sure that any reforms don't actually further burden the industry, because that can always be the challenge when you're trying to implement some new policy frameworks. But running in parallel with that's obviously been the Commission of Inquiry into the CFMEU, and this has been a long-going sort of issue, and that's been publicised, and some of the information, particularly in regards to the Watson report, has been horrifying to hear what's been going on site. I'd say it's been the worst kept secret in the industry. So when we have a look at those cultural pieces and then productivity more broadly, how do we get more young people to want to come on site? Well, we need to make sure culturally it feels safe, and that, that women and the next generation of trades feel supported when they're on building sites and they don't feel intimidated. Mm-hmm. And that's really important. But also, what role can innovation and technology play in boosting productivity? Because we really are building the things the same way that we have been for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And so one of the things about the Queensland Productivity Commission is the role that modern methods of construction play. We always kind of giggle in industry because modern methods is not particularly modern. It's been around for a long time. But how does government potentially embed that into their procurement processes so we can boost that productivity? Mm-hmm. And also looking at Queensland, like it's hot. It does get hot. Everyone wants safety on site is paramount for everybody. Everyone wants to make sure they go to work and come home, and that is an absolute not negotiable for everybody. So how do we look at our climate and think about when we work on site? How do we, potentially get those shifts when things are cooler? But also, how do we actually make sure that 2.75 days is not the normal? How do we get back to a normal working week and work really collectively? So we're at kind of a bit of a crossroads at the moment, because all of these things are running in parallel. As I said, Commission of Inquiry is happening, the QPC report's landed, government's going to make some solid inroads to that. And the industry needs to lean into that as well to make sure we're really being bold and courageous in how we're moving forward. Because if you take the Olympic infrastructure out of it, so they get that $7.2 billion for the 17 new and upgraded venues, then you've got a lot of work around the transport connectivity, and then you've got your major health pipeline as well. There's an awful lot to build in a relatively short period of time. Our workforce shortages also play a role in the productivity challenges.
So about that one.
Yeah, exactly. So you go, okay, well, it's kind of this perfect storm. I'm always an optimist. So I think when there's challenges like this is when we're bold and we start to break the the business as usual model. And I think some really exciting things will happen about it. I'm under no, we'll get it done.
Yeah.
It'll just be a matter of how we get it done and making sure we take the opportunity to innovate and to do things differently and give ourselves permission to try things. And I think as an industry, we are doing things pretty much the same way that we've always done them. So how do we make sure there's a framework where we can adopt different methods without compromising quality and design outcomes and safety along the way?
Oh, well, that's so exciting. I'm so glad to hear that because, we've definitely experienced a lot of those holdups ourselves as far as Luverclad goes with infrastructure, rail projects and health projects.
Yeah.
So it's sounding like we've got a positive future.
Yeah, and I think for the first time in a long time, we've got state and federal governments focusing on productivity. It's all we're talking about. And productivity is not just the challenges aren't just in our sector. We need to make sure that we're a productive country and so that we've got some challenges there. So everyone sort of talks about the role that, AI and technology can play. But from a construction point of view, I think about tapping into that 50% of the workforce. Like there's only 2% of women in the construction sector on site. There's 18% in the industry, but only 2% on site. We can tap into so much more of the workforce if we create an environment where they want to go to work every day and it's safe, but also the next generation of trades. These kids have grown up, they're digital natives, they do things so differently. So how do we meet the needs of the growing workforce and build that really sustained pipeline of homegrown talent and then potentially complementing that with skilled migration, which is a really political issue. It shouldn't be. Australia's built off the back of migration. How do we have that conversation in a grown-up setting is something I think we absolutely need to. And I think we're getting to that point where that will become a non-negotiable.
Some people are saying that Queensland has become slower and more expensive to build than any other state.
Yeah, well, up until about, I think it was like 12 months ago, Brisbane had the unenviable title of being the most expensive place to build and the least productive. So these two things are obviously connected, and the productivity challenges, as I've outlined, it's a gigantic mountain for us to climb. Construction costs are a huge challenge, and when it is expensive, it's more expensive to build new than it is to buy existing. You've got a massive issue. And when we have a look at the shortages that we're facing here in Queensland, rightfully so, the housing crisis remains a headliner and unfortunately will continue to do so. But we're also lacking in supply when it comes to commercial office buildings. We're lacking industrial developments, those job-creating industrial parks that we so desperately need so people can live near where they work. But we also, from a competitive component, from a Queensland economic point of view, we need to make sure that we can maintain that industrial development. We've got a massive hotel shortage because we don't have enough. Even now, if we have a look at the hotel component, when we have a major event, prices spike, but we sort of can't plateau that out. So those developments become really challenging to sort of stack up, particularly in those sort of quiet months where you don't have the room occupancy. And then, just generally speaking, we have a housing crisis across every asset type. And so the construction costs are still continue to be the biggest issue. And I think, essentially feasibility is broken. So we need to really be looking at all of the levers that we can. It's all well and good to fast track planning. And if we can guarantee planning, because, time kills deals. So you fast track your planning component, but if you're still if it's still costing you 9,000 square metre to deliver a 2-bedroom apartment, that means your sale price is going to be well above 1.5 million. That's not an affordable product either. So you're then having to deliver that luxury high end, and there's a really shallow buyer pool for that, which it's the only product at the moment that is getting delivered. And at some point that buyer pool will dry up because it's a very small part of the market. So it's a really interesting time, I guess, from a policy point of view. And the policies we're seeing come out are all well intended, but it's making sure that they work cohesively together and you're continually sort of tweaking them as required because it's very expensive to deliver anything at this point in time. And that's a huge challenge for Queensland, and it's not going to be one that goes away anytime soon.
So there's a lot of social housing and things like that getting built at the moment. Is that going to help ease some of that or balance out some of that? Or
there's incentives on the table at both state and federal government level. So that's where we're seeing those community housing providers, those social and affordable housing developments get up. And that's because they've got government interventions around them. And then we're seeing the high-end luxury because we know that that's where the only thing that can be delivered, but that's getting snapped up by sort of your downsizers or people who are potentially selling out of other jurisdictions and buying in into Queensland. So there's that bit in the middle, and that's where we really need to make sure looking at the housing asset typology in a continuum, and it's all interconnected. So we really need to make sure we've got the greenfield detached housing being delivered. We need to make sure we've got that, what we would call the missing middle. So your sort of townhouses, your infill, that's not your scale product. And that's the really challenging component. The other thing is looking at how people move through the housing typologies. So if you're, for example, someone who, I would just use the south side of Brisbane because that's what I'm familiar with. Say you're in Norman Park and you're in your 4-bedroom family home and you might be on your own and your next sort of step potentially could be downsizing into something that's more fit for purpose. The way that your pension is assessed, the way in which you need to be able to access potentially retirement villages, it's not straightforward. And so we need to look at where are the blockages and it's very expensive to move house, particularly if you are
absolutely
wanting to downsize, you're then paying stamp duty. How do we actually make it really easy for people to move through the housing typologies? And I think there's something to be said in that, and that would require both fed and state intervention to help some of those people, potentially elderly people who are living in those 4-bedroom family homes that could be living in places within that same community, potentially retirement villages, potentially apartments, potentially, townhouses where it's fit for purpose for them. It's more suited to their lifestyle, the accessibility piece now when we're delivering new product and making it really straightforward for them to be able to move through that. And that comes with looking at how we tax the housing sort of component.
With the major labour shortages that we're hearing about impacting delivery, how should the industry think differently about the workforce skills and productivity as demand ramps up towards 2032? Obviously, there's a lot of people I'm hearing that are wanting to move to Queensland. They're thinking this is going to be, where all the work is. Is that going to amp up the prices as well, do you think? That kind of thing?
Yeah, it's really interesting because we're in this, fortunate dilemma where we have got an awful lot to build, but also the future of Queensland's never looked brighter. And I think the Games is a part of it. But, there's that really sort of catalytic moment. And I think it's hard to walk down the street without bumping into a Victorian who fled post-COVID and wanted to come to the Sunshine State, and fair enough too. I think it's about, we talk about the labour shortages to deliver, and there's lots of numbers that sort of get kicked around. But if we can boost productivity, that obviously puts a downward component on the actual number that we need. But I think it's about attracting and retaining the right skill sets that we need. And so that's a productive piece. So, at the moment, we definitely need more tradies. So, Queensland's doors should be wide open. But ultimately, that does put pressure on the housing market as well. And we know that that's under significant strain as it is. I do think those things, if we can continue to make a concerted effort on boosting supply, that'll just be part and parcel. But if we're attracting productive people, and that goes from a skilled migration point of view as well, if the moment you land, you're delivering housing or adding to the supply, whether that's building the Games, whether that's building commercial office buildings, you're contributing back to a productive environment. And I think that's the way that we should be looking at things versus, hang on, we've got no houses, how are we going to manage this? There's also the more extreme conversations around workers' camps and how we navigate that. And potentially that may be a discussion. Queensland's so decentralised. How do we deliver all the things that we are required to in a way that doesn't put impact on Queenslanders? And I think that's a really important component. I think we will navigate through this, so we will find a way. But right now, we need to make sure we've got the right people coming to Queensland to help us deliver. There's enough work for everybody. So before the Games infrastructure, the 17 new and upgraded venues, $7.1 billion. There's so much other work. And if you're a young kid now looking at the pipeline from a public sector point of view, there's enough work there for you to begin and end your career there. And I think that's really exciting. So we really need to start thinking about how we get kids back into trades and make that appealing to them. And I really think that technology plays a role. Let's use screen time for good.
Yes. Yeah, the other thing I've always thought about trades as well, like in European countries, they really kind of put trade certificates on this higher platform.
Yeah, agree.
It's much more prestigious to do a trade almost. I think if we could bring some of that here, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Really emphasising, honing that craft and being that tradesman is actually just as good as being a doctor or anything like that, because then you take pride in your work, don't you?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I think one of the things about we're still delivering apprenticeships the same way we did, say, when we were finishing high school.
Exactly.
And the world's changed so much.
Yeah.
So how do we actually look at how we not fast track that without compromising quality, but also tap into the generation and understand, like, these kids, the first generation of digital natives, they grew up with technology. They don't know any different. So we really need to tap into that. And I think with that, you then tap into a whole different generation of skill set and innovation that we all could learn so much from. And I'm excited by that, because I think when you've got an immutable deadline and you've got such an enormous amount to deliver, great innovation will come from that.
Yeah. So with the current, hold-ups on projects and things like that, what could architects and engineers actually do better to really help things for the future?
Well, one of the things I think from an architectural point of view, and I've loved seeing this particularly over the last sort of 3 years, is those really provocative, bold designs. And I think that's really makes people really excited about what's possible. From a really tangible point of view, when we have a look at the labour shortages, engineers are a huge part of that labour shortage. And I think when we look at around 27, 28, it looks like we're about 5,000 short.
Wow.
And I know that this is probably not as an exciting call to action, but how do we actually promote the interests of that and encourage more people to want to get into engineering, particularly women? I think it would be really important for how do we work collectively. Engineers Australia do a fabulous job of showcasing and trying to, that call to action, but how do we actually work collectively to make sure we're attracting and retaining that talent? It's something that we desperately need. So if I can get the engineers to promote their work, that would be absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we work a lot with engineers, so I think we can help that as well.
Yeah, and I think too, remember when you're a kid in year sort of 10 or 11 and everyone says to you, what do you want to be when you grow up? You don't know. You don't know what's out there. And so I think one of the things that we do at Property Council, which I really love, is we do a program called Girls in Property. We get year 9 and year 10 students from public schools and we showcase the careers that are available.
Yes.
So a lot of them will just think you can be a builder or a real estate agent. And by the end of the day, they've climbed all over a site. They've met maybe a development manager. They've met an engineer. They've met an architect. So how do we actually really tap into those, the kids when they're making decisions, but let them know what's possible, because you only really know what your parents do or what you see on TV. So we need to start having broader conversations at that sort of high school level around the career opportunities. And when I think about property, it's so broad, property construction. You could start somewhere and 10 years later, exactly like me, you end up in a completely different component. So you could start out, potentially as an engineer, and then you work your way through and you might decide that you want to be in another component of the industry. So I think as a collective, we really need to be thinking about how we amplify the education and awareness around the career opportunities that are across the sector and really be proud of the work that we do.
There's so much you could do with engineering as well, and so many different avenues.
100%.
Yeah.
I look at some of the infrastructure that's delivered and always think about the engineering genius that goes into it. And thank goodness for clever people like that. You don't want someone like me designing a bridge. But really actually getting people to realise, and young kids wouldn't even know that the engineer is critical in that. So it's really about getting in early and really giving the tools and the resources to the schools in particular to sort of amplify what's available in the sector.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm excited about as well with this podcast, because we get to interview these amazing engineers behind a lot of these great projects. So it's really
good on you for shining a light on that.
Yeah. How important do you think it is to use local contractors, local products, Queensland, especially leading up to 2032?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is so if we think about the games component, I think it's such an exciting opportunity for Queensland businesses and for Queensland contractors. I think we absolutely need to be leaning into that and supporting local business. But at the same time, there's such an enormous amount of work to be delivered. We're going to need to do both things. So I don't think there's any doubt that Queensland local businesses will benefit exponentially, not just from the games, but from all the other things that are being delivered. The government's just recently changed their procurement processes as well, and there's a real, focus on that Queensland first piece. I think it's about knowing when you need to be able to be bringing in other components without compromising that, making sure that we think about the modern methods of construction, for example, is, we've got some great local products here. Potentially, how does, imported product support so we can deliver at the scale that we need to, but making sure we've got that Queensland first approach. And I think everyone's acutely aware of that.
So we talked about collaboration. So how do you see the collaboration between government, property designers and builders needing to evolve to deliver both the housing and major infrastructure more efficiently?
I think collaboration is critical. I think alignment. So I think something that we have really felt from an industry point of view, particularly since the change of government, is industry is seen as a partner, and that's really important because the private sector, so you just take housing, the private sector delivers 98% of the housing stock. So government can make policy, but without engaging and working in partnership with the private sector, you're not going to be able to achieve the outcomes that we require.
Yeah.
So I think it's about seeing ourselves as partners in the ecosystem rather than separate entities. And I think that change in mindset and engagement has really helped to buoy industry's confidence. I think having a really clear vision too, and I think a lot of the councils are doing a really good job of this at the moment, is looking forward rather than looking at, sometimes with their planning frameworks, it's almost a rearview mirror. And so then you are not actually looking forward to the vision that we'd like for the future. So I think that's really important. And I think one of the things, and it's super boring, but is making sure that we're actually delivering the critical infrastructure to achieve it. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're a victim of a lack of investment over 30 years. So this trunk infrastructure, deliver new precincts, new housing, commercial office, it hasn't been realised because the trunk infrastructure hasn't been delivered or hasn't been future planned for. And I think at the moment we've had this accelerated growth and it's caught up with us really quickly. It was always going to come, but it's come faster than we thought it would. So how do we make sure we've got really coordinated land use planning and the right investment to ensure that we are always thinking about how we can deliver for the future?
How does sustainability come into this? We're often talking about Green Star ratings and everyone wants to work towards that net zero.
Yeah.
Is that going to be critical as well for delivering
when you have
projects?
A look at Queensland, think about what Mother Nature unleashes on us, whether you're in Southeast Queensland or in far north Queensland, the resilience piece is really, really important. And I think, those floods that we had, I think it was 2021, you could see, particularly in the CBD, all the lessons that were learnt from the 2011 floods and how quickly the CBD was to bounce back. And I think industry is at the forefront of those innovations, and sustainability is so incredibly important, particularly as we look forward. So I think it's embedded in a lot of the design components, and I think that's becoming sort of business as usual, which is excellent, and it's becoming part of the sort of construction methodology approaches. And I think Queensland's got a great opportunity to really lean into that because we have got such a big state. We're decentralised and the weather events are quite different, but also can be quite catastrophic depending on where you are.
Just the importance of, buildings that breathe and, seeing all those types of projects coming through is really beautiful in Queensland at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like you seeing we were just talking about 80 Ann Street before, that beautiful homage to the Queensland architecture, but also designing with the environment and the climate and making, places that are shady and places that are walkable in the middle of our summers is really important. And I think people are really aware of that because you want your city to be activated and you want your communities to be activated even when it is hot. And I think that's something that the property industry does really, really well and designers are really thinking about. And I think, and credit to councils and to state government as well, because when they're planning for their precincts and places, that's front of mind.
So if you could leave architects and engineers with one clear message about their role in Queensland's growth over the next decade, what would it be?
Well, that's a really good question. I think seeing yourselves as part of that, we talked earlier about when do you get the best outcomes, is upfront and early and really leading with that vision, but also making sure that you're part of that functional team. So the vision is actually then able to be deployed. And I think that's really important, but also to think big and bold. And I think that's what's really exciting at the moment is we're seeing some really incredible visions come out and they've been really provocative and having conversations about what's possible. And I think particularly for architects, I think keep doing that because people love to see what's possible and to imagine what the places and spaces might be like if we actually lean into a bold vision. And I think from a point of view is, as I said from the outset, maintaining what is uniquely Queensland. And I think that's what's so great about Queenslanders is that they don't try to be anything else. And I think it's really important that our built form reflects that. And that's what I would love to see in the 20, 30 years post the Games, is that we're still paying homage to the great state that we are.
Where to next for you?
This is a question I get asked a lot. I love my job, and I have, the great pleasure of being on the Geeka board as well. We're appointed until November 2028. I have no plans other than to continue to champion the interests of the industry and to ensure that we get some really good outcomes. We've done some great stuff in the last couple of years, and I've never really had a plan, so we'll just see what happens.
I can see some exciting things in the future.
I think it's really important that we have conversations like this, and credit to you and your team for bringing this podcast to light. I think one of the exciting things at the moment that we have in Queensland, and we've got something that the other states don't have, we've got this beautiful sense of collegiality. And I think when we bounce off each other, these incredible ideas come to life. And so I think there's enough room for everybody. And I think one of the things I love about the industry that I get to represent is that you can have 20 competitors in a room, but they generally try and vie for the outcome that's the best for the city or the state. And I think we need to hang on to that, but also lean into that more so we can drive really great outcomes rather than settling for what might be the cheapest scenario. We actually want the best outcome and plan for that now so we can deliver that for the future.
We always like to end our podcast with the inspiring three.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a project that really inspires you?
I don't want to pick a winner in Queensland because it'll upset my members, but there is a landmark that I have loved since I was a little kid, and it always made me feel, when I lived overseas, quite homesick, I guess, in a way, but also had that yearn for Australia, and that is the Opera House. And I think that is,
100%
architectural genius.
Wow.
It's about pushing the limits. And if you saw some of the designs that could have been, you just think about how amazing and visionary. And I think, that's just an iconic Australian landmark that is, all over the world. People know where it is. There's millions of beautiful projects in Queensland, but like I said, I don't want to pick a winner.
It never gets old, does it? The Opera House. Every time I go there,
Stunning.
Whether it's the sunset, the morning, sunrise, it looks so different in different lights. It's just, and it is incredible. Yeah.
Beautiful piece of architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. With such a busy career that you have, is there a particular place or practice that keeps you grounded under pressure?
So my favourite thing in the world at the moment, I have 2 teenagers who I love dearly. They're busy, and they both, they work on the weekends and stuff. Sometimes just being in my house on my own, it doesn't happen very often. I love my husband very much, but there's sometimes on a Saturday where it might just be for an hour or so. I just love that. No one to talk to, nothing to do, nowhere to be. Yeah. And I think as I'm getting older, I really value that so much more. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, I'd jam my weekends full of social activities and never let myself recharge. Whereas now it's just like the really simple things.
It's necessary.
And, being with friends, being with my family when we're not in that kind of having to rush, be somewhere, do something. But yeah, just being in the quiet of my own home is pretty special.
And what about a particular person? Is there any particular person that's really inspired you or given you some advice that's really stuck with you in your career?
I don't know if there's any one individual. I've had the great pleasure of having incredible mentors throughout my career. I've also had some not so great bosses that I've learned equal amounts from. But if I think about probably who's inspired me, I have the great pleasure of knowing Turia Pitt, and maybe your listeners might know Turia was that incredible ultramarathon runner who was caught up in a terrible wildfire and survived against all odds. But listening to her and the way that she just cracks on with life and has had to endure the most incredible pain and suffering and to rebuild her life. When you hear someone like her say, it'll be all right, we can get on with it, I just think, man, humans are incredible. And I think it's just a really good reminder that there's always someone who's been faced huge adversity and able to overcome it. And I think when I think of inspirations, I do think of her because she just she's looked at it head on and just said, I'm going to continue living the best life that I can, despite the fact that it didn't go to plan. So she's incredible inspiration. But that said, so are all the people that I have in my lives. Everyone, I think of my family and my friends. They inspire me and motivate me. And I feel incredibly lucky to be surrounded by such love.
And you also had that experience.
Very different, but yeah, a near-death one nonetheless.
Wow.
Yeah.
So are you able to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So that's actually how I met Turia. So back in 2016, I met Turia Pitt and she said to me, I'm going to trek Kokoda. And I go, oh, that's something I've always wanted to do. And she goes, well, do it. And if someone like Teree Pitt says that to you, there's not an excuse that you can come up with that doesn't see you on the Kokoda track. So my girlfriend Sally and I, we raised a stack of cash. We flew to Papua New Guinea and set about trekking the Kokoda track. And it's about day 2, the night before, it had just rained and rained and rained in a way that it only can in places like that. So the next day we were all wet and soggy and we were trudging along towards Eora, which is quite a high part of the track, and about, I'm going to say, maybe sort of 7 Ks from the Eora village, a really narrow part of the track. I put my foot down and the side of the track kind of gave way and I just fell down. My porter and I both fell down the side of the cliff. He was able to hang on and grab himself. And I remember just putting my hands over my head thinking, it'll be all right. And banged myself up in a whole bunch of vines and thought, oh, my legs hurt. My head hurts a little bit. I'll be okay. And then within about, I don't know, what felt like 30 seconds, it was definitely longer than that though, a whole bunch of porters were scaling down the side of the cliff and down to the bottom because I hadn't fallen the whole way, probably another 10 metres to the creek bed. So that would have been an entirely different story. I wouldn't be here with you today if that was the case. And they cut me out of the vines and passed me down and then made this sort of stretcher and then carried me through to Eora, where at that point I went, I think I'm in a little bit of trouble here. So essentially I'd sort of torn every muscle and hamstrings and my legs were swelling in front of me. It was awful. But the cloud had sort of settled in, so it was too late for a medevac to come in. So I had to spend the night in this hut. And my friend Sally, and we will forever be great mates. She's a nurse and thank God for that. She spent the night with me and we didn't know if I had internal bleeding or anything like that. All I knew, I was just in a world of hurt. I had a big knock on my head. And she sort of says to me now, she's like, I never knew that night if you were going to wake up or not. And then the next morning they heli-vac'd me out to Port Moresby Hospital, which is quite the place. And I was there for a little while before I got heli-vac'd back to Brisbane. And I spent a good 6 weeks stuck up in my room because I couldn't walk, couldn't do too much at all. It was awful. And I had really bad survivor's guilt. Like I just fell 25 metres and for context, that's Kangaroo Point cliffs. Wow. By all accounts, I shouldn't be here. But I got really depressed because it was the first time in my life where I think I'd actually had to stop.
You couldn't do anything.
100%. Pretty independent person. Had these little kids who I don't think really realised how severe it was. I was on some awful painkillers as well, which made my sort of head go to some pretty yucky places. And there was some times there where I was like, I actually don't want to wake up tomorrow. This is awful. I had my businesses back in Adelaide and I just felt so out of control. And then there was this moment of like, nah, you've got one precious life. Sort yourself out, kiddo. And gave myself a bit of a kick up the butt. And
wow, that's giving me goosebumps.
Yeah, it was a really tough time. But I think about that now and go, everyone's got a story or everyone's got that in them where there's times where you've had to dig really deep. And now when I think things are tough, I'm like, you've got this, don't worry about it. So
yeah, and I guess sometimes as horrible as it is, those situations are sometimes a blessing because they really show you
totally
and make you so much more grateful.
Yeah, 100%. And I did after that, it was kind of catalytic. Like I got divorced, I sold my businesses, and now I think of where my life is. I'm happily married to an amazing man who's an incredible stepfather to my children. I think I'm a way better mum. I really had to stop in those moments that when you're faced with your own mortality, you've got to ask yourself, are you living your best life? Mm-hmm. And then you have to be really honest with yourself, and that can be really confronting. And I look back at that time and think I'm grateful for it. It did make me make some decisions that ultimately have led me here.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that
no worries.
Story. That's really amazing. Now I can see where you've come from and it makes sense. So why this conversation matters. This conversation goes beyond policy headlines to explore what reform, productivity and the 2032 opportunity truly means for the professionals delivering Queensland's future. At Louvreclad Inside Out, we believe our state is shaped not just by decisions in Parliament, but by the architects, engineers and industry leaders turning vision into reality every day. By unpacking the pressures, opportunities and intent behind reform, we aim to help industry build smarter, move faster and deliver lasting housing and infrastructure outcomes for Queensland. For more insights and resources, please head to louvreclad.com. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to hit follow. Please join us next time.